Another big round of tuning has come through the PTR for 10.2. We have quite a good amount of changes this time around as well. Maybe perhaps some of the specs that have been kind of left behind by Blizzard will be given some attention in this round of changes. We start with a class that definitely has not been left alone by Blizzard because it's Demon Hunter, which is in the process of receiving a rework for both of the specs. The general Demon Hunter 3 is going to be receiving quite a lot of changes because, for example, you can see that now Fodder to the Flame, previously a choice node for Havoc, and Elysian Decree, previously a talent for Vengeance, are now in the General 3 of Demon Hunter. If we go back to 10.1.7, you didn't have these talents, you only had the Hunt. Now you have triple choice, obviously you can only choose 2 of them at the end of your General 3. Your General 3 also gave you a few other things. For example, you now have Sigil of Flame being baseline for both of the Demon Hunter specs. And you have received also some discounts to quite a few talents, now costing 1 instead of costing 2. The only perhaps annoyance now with this change is that your Metamorphosis cooldown reduction talent has been moved far up your talent tree, because previously it was quite easily reachable with 1 talent point in the middle bracket of talents. Now it's 2 talent points right before the Hunt. So it kind of forces you, if you want to go down this route, to pick the Hunt and miss out on one of these 2 newly added talents in the General 3 of Demon Hunter. The specific changes for Havoc are also quite interesting. We have gotten the 2 talents that were previously missing down the sides, either improved Fell Rush for Fell Rush damage or Dash of Chaos to allow you to dash back after you Fell Rush, which could be quite useful for a Havoc Demon Hunter actually. And then an all-purpose talent to give you 5% more magical damage done and 5% less physical damage taken. There are also some quality of life additions in here, like for example, you can have Throgglaive trigger Cycle of Hatred if you take Furious Throws. So as long as you pick up this talent, now your Throgglaive will also be interacting with Cycle of Hatred. We were mentioning that Blizzard was pushing for this Throgglaive build, but the Throgglaive build at the moment is somewhere like 15% less damage than your standard Demon Hunter build, so it needed to be buffed by quite a bit. Meanwhile, the changes for Vengeance are more about talent discounts. You've gotten a whole bunch of talents reduced to a 1 cost rather than 2, which is going to make it easier, more manageable to move around the talent tree without having to spend nearly as many points as before. So overall, positive changes for both Vengeance and Havoc in this round of tuning. We can say, I guess, given by the reaction of the community, positive changes for balance as well, because Blizzard has been reverting the initial change they wanted to have with Orbital Strike. The initial change was putting Orbital Strike as a choice node with Wild Mushroom. Instead, now this has been completely reverted. Now Orbital Strike is back to being a choice with Primordial Arcanic Pulsar, and you can still go and take Wild Mushroom by itself. On top of that, Wild Mushroom has also been buffed by 10% in damage, and a slight change to your mastery, which shouldn't change too much in the way Balanced Druid works. I guess the main #1 positive change still is the revert of the Orbital Strike and where it's gonna stay in the talent tree for Balanced Druid. Slight, mostly neutral changes for Feral, who gets Rampant Ferocity buffed by 10%, being able to use Innervate in cat form, doing more damage with Apex Predator's chance to proc in AoE, but slightly less in single target proc chance, and then the nerf to Relentless Predator, who now reduces the energy cost of Ferocious Bite by 10 instead of 20%. Overall, it's a mostly neutral change. Also, very slight buff to Resto, just a bunch of mana changes, slightly lower mana costs to Wild Growth and Regrowth. Tiny, but still positive changes for the Evoker specs. For once we see a set of balance tuning where augmentation isn't being nerfed. In fact, if anything, it's a slight quality of life buff because now Prescience has 2 charges. Devastation gets more tankiness, they get less magic damage taken and they can heal themselves or receive more healing with Attune to the Dream, and Preservation also gets a slight buff Fluttering Seedlings can no longer occur from Emerald Blossoms that are triggered from an echo, but now Fluttering Seedlings healing has been increased by 20%. This is overall a healing increase for Preservation Evoker. Then we have Hunter. As I mentioned, perhaps one of the specs we were waiting to see some extra changes given how Beast Mastery Hunter is doing well right now. Maybe we were waiting for Marksmanship. No, there is absolutely zero change to Marksmanship. We have instead the main change of the day, which is Hunter's Mark now increases all damage taken by the target by 5%, while the target is above 80% max HP. Now, everyone quickly starts screaming that this is a raid buff. So Hunters have been given a raid buff. Well, you know, doing 5% more damage for 20% of the boss's HP equals, on average, to being 1% more damage throughout the entire fight. This is a very, very tiny, a very minor buff, which you could hardly even call a raid buff. You know, you could go, for example, to a class like Monk, and Monk has some secondary buffs that aren't even their main raid buff, like, for example, Close to Heart, to give all of your allies around you 8% more healing, or give them 4% reduced damage taken from area of effects, which are actually stronger than this Hunter raid buff. And these aren't even the main buffs that a Monk brings. Mystic Touch, the physical damage done on the target, which is 5% at all times, that's a proper raid buff. And on top of that, you have these two additional things. So this is a compromise, I would say, a middle of the way that doesn't really make any side happy, because this is not really a raid buff. It's unlikely a Hunter will be brought in exclusively because they have this raid buff available to them. And also what this does is going to make Elemental Shamans and Resto Shamans even more triggered. Now, basically, the only two specs in the game without any proper raid buff or party buff, if you consider Wind Fury for enhancement. And still, to close, pretty sad to see that Hunter is not getting any changes when it comes to Marksmanship. We do have one tiny quality of life for survival. Your 4-set piece now gives your next Wildfire Bomb not consume a charge rather than generating one charge. This is good if you were capped in charges of Wildfire Bomb and this procced. This was gonna do nothing if you already had max charges. Instead, now you simply won't consume your next charge, which is just strictly a better effect. No mages, no mage changes at the moment, also quite surprising, given that Arcane and Fire weren't doing too well. Monk. Mistweaver gets, again, more attention from the changes. Most of these changes, though, are centered around tuning more Healing Elixir and Expel Harm. So we're not talking about something major about your rotation for Mistweaver. Healing Elixir is receiving a whole bunch of quality of life, like additionally healing if the excess charges are generated, or now restoring more health and triggering at higher HP, Expel Harm costing less mana, healing for far more, dealing more damage equal to the amount healed, increase the range of Expel Harm, etc, etc. You also have a nerf to the 4-piece set bonus, the Scuffed Cloud Burst Totem of Mistweaver. Your 4-piece now accumulates 15% of the healing done instead of 20%. And then some numbers tuning. Unison now duplicates 75% of Soothing Mist instead of 100. Enveloping Breath heals for 20% less, but you do 20% more damage with Rising Sun Kick. As well as better defensiveness by having Calming Presence, reducing damage taken by 6% instead of 3%. Overall, still, in general, positive changes for Mistweaver, especially for the Expel Harm and Healing Elixir, even though you have to bite a nerf to your 4-piece set bonus, which is still a strong set overall for a Mistweaver. Windwalker gets a so-called rework to their tier, however, it is still mostly the same. This still has the same problem of being RNG. Now your free spinning crane kicks and your melee abilities can give you blackout reinforcements, which buffs your next blackout kick by 150%. And then once you use that empowered blackout kick, your abilities get a 3-second cooldown reduction. So it has been buffed, this CDR. It started at 1 second CDR, then it was buffed to 2 second CDR, and then it was buffed again to 3 second CDR. It's getting stronger and stronger over time. It still has the annoyance of having the RNG component to the tier set, where you don't have nearly as much of a ability to control the power of this set by yourself as a monk. What a surprise, what a surprise, Holy Paladin gets more nerfs. Who is surprised at this point? Sanctified Plates is now 40% less effective. This is quite hurtful. Sanctified Plates is the Giga Tank effect right here. You're now gonna be getting less armor, less stamina, and take more damage from area of effect as a Holy Paladin. Also, Blessing of Winter now gives you less mana, and also your very strong 2-piece has been nerfed in healing by 25%. The only thing you get back is that now the 4-piece set bonus not only reduces the cooldown of Daybreak by 15 seconds, but also gives you 25% haste for 5 seconds, which is definitely a much more tiny payoff than the nerfs you have received here for Holy Paladin. So the nerf train of Holy Paladin doesn't stop here at the moment. Priest gets some interesting changes. Nerfed in damage because now Rhapsody increases the damage of Holy Nova by 10% instead of 20, and then a weird change to Harsh Discipline. Now, instead of proccing off of casting 4 damage spells, in this case, you know, if you cast Smite, Power Solace or Mind Blast 4 times, your next penance fires additional bolts and is free. Now, instead, this is going to proc from casting Pyroid Radiance. This is slightly worse. Number 1, because in the next tier you lose the insta-cast Radiance, which is gonna make it more clunky to cast. Number 2, you might have wanted to just do some damage as a Discipline Priest without the need to use Radiance and still benefit from the empowered penance. Instead now, if you want that empowered penance, you are forced to cast Pyroid Radiance, which is a very scarce, very important spell you kind of want to save for the right moment. Instead, right now, you could have simply spammed 4 smites to gain your Harsh Discipline buff. It also lowers the skill ceiling of Discipline, because you always wanted the empowered penance before casting Radiance. Now you have it guaranteed without having to plan for it, basically. And then the buff to the mega spell of Discipline, Ultimate Penitence, for more spell power and more healing power on its penance bolts. Slight nerf to Shadow as well, one of the better performing specs in the PTR. Now the 2-piece set bonus triggers additional Shadow Ward deaths at 35% effectiveness instead of 50%. There are some changes to Rogue once more. Confusingly, there are no real proper nerfs to Outlaw, which continues to be a very well-performing spec on the PTR, but none of these changes actually do anything to nerf Outlaw. If anything, this is even a slight buff to Outlaw. We also have changes to Shaman, primarily Enhancement and Elemental. Both Shaman and Enhancement get a change to Splinter Elements, the talent that gives you extra haste when you use Primordial Wave based on how many targets you are hitting, how many targets with Flame Shock you are hitting. Previously it was 10% per target, now it's 20% base plus 4% per target. The TLDR is that as long as you are hitting 3 targets, this version is better. As soon as you start hitting 4 targets, this version is better. Enhancement Shaman has received some changes, especially also in the talent 3 of the spec. If you go to 10.2, for example, one of the main changes to the spec is that now Elemental Blast is closer down your talent 3 and in a choice node that you can pick up and ignore Elemental Blast with Tempest Strike, which is just a passive damage increase. You also have some other cool changes, like for example, Elemental Assault can also generate a Maelstrom weapon from Ice Strike and Lava Lash rather than only from Storm Strike, and Legacy of the Frost Witch now also increases frost damage when consuming 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon instead of just physical damage. These are overall all positive changes for Enhancement, a spec that was already doing quite well anyways on the PTR, as it was before this set of changes. Warlock, we continue down the line of attempting to change how demonology works. Now, many of these changes are much better than the original intended set of changes that demo received on the PTR. You now have gotten a bunch of new talents focusing once again more on your pets, on your demons. All of these 3 new talents. Shadow Invocation is a buff to your Bile Scourge Bombers. Fell Invocation is more buffs, this time to your Summon Vile Fiend, and Spiteful Reconstitution is a buff to your Imps. On top of that, Imperator and Malefic Impact now are 1 cost talent instead of 2, freeing up more talent points for you. Pit Lord's Felseeker's damage has been buffed. Power Siphon now prioritizes consuming Wild Imps rather than Imp Gang bosses. That being said, even with this positive set of changes, the tier set is still bad for demo. It still has this very annoying thing with Demon Bolt applying Doom Brand that explodes, and Hand of Gul'dan is going to reduce the time, the ticking time for it to explode, which is still clunky and still doesn't really feel like a demonology tier set. So while it's good that some of these changes are putting back more importance in your demon style of demonology, which is basically what I'm assuming demo players would like to have, rather than becoming a caster that occasionally has some pets out, still, this tier set doesn't really fit the theme of demonology for now. And these were all of the changes we have gotten so far in this round of tuning. There have been some surprises, like for example how Discipline and Holy were the lowest performing healers in the PTR so far, but haven't really received any meaningful changes, or things like, for example, you also have Mages, where we saw Arcane and Fire not doing nearly as well on the PTR, not receiving any changes whatsoever. The other big question mark is Marksmanship, which was one of the weakest in the PTR and receives no changes. Once more, at this point, it's almost confirmed Augmentation will be a best in slot for your raid, and very likely for Mythic Plus as well, given that doesn't look like Blizzard has in store any more major nerfs for the spec. So that looks like the direction we're gonna go for Season 3. Interesting set of changes, also with a pretty good timing, because today, basically tonight, yesterday night, is when the Mythic raid testing started. So we are going to be able to check the effects of all of these changes with the results of the boss testing from the PTR. So as we wait for that to happen, we're going to take a pause and collect our data before we report on the effects of these changes on the PTR. With this out of the way, it's now time to leave each other once more. We are starting the goodbyes by thanking all of our Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel, which can still be given completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I have to go out. I have to be done in 24 minutes. I think I can make it, just barely.